When the ASUS ROG Ally was first announced, I was extremely excited, and not just because of the fact that it was another handheld coming out onto the market, but because they said that they were going to price it competitively towards the Steam Deck. The Steam Deck, before the ASUS ROG Ally was even announced, was the go-to for having a mobile handheld experience without having to pay the thousands of dollars that you would get for other Windows-based handhelds. This was just an awesome experience. Now, don't get me wrong, there was a little bit of jankiness when the Steam Deck was first released, but with software patches and things like that, things were ironed out. With the ASUS ROG Ally, when I first got my hands onto it, I was expecting a seamless experience. Now, I primarily am a Windows user, so I knew that I was going to come in and be relatively used to the OS that was already there. When I booted up the Ally for the first time, it was not the smoothest experience, and to be honest with you, most of my experience with the ROG Ally is not the smoothest experience at all. I do know that there are plenty of patches that are being released, and even in my initial setup, there were probably about an hour's worth of downloads and installations, reboots, and so on and so forth before it finally got up to date. Now, this is a full retail version of the ASUS ROG Ally. I know that some of the reviewers that are out there that are much larger than I am got a review unit that was already set up and ready for them to go ahead and start gaming. With me, it's something that you will go ahead and experience when you go ahead and buy one for yourself if you're interested in one. At the time of this recording, there's really only one version of the ROG Ally that's able to be purchased, and that's the Z1 Extreme version that goes for $699. Now, there is technically a cheaper version for $599 that's going to be released later on, but to be honest with you, looking at the specs and the difference between the two, you just might as well go ahead and go with the $699 version if you can afford it, because you just get way more power for just $100 more. When I pre-ordered the ASUS ROG Ally, I did also go ahead and get the travel case and a 65-watt charging dock, which is supposed to emulate that whole docking experience that you would get with the Steam Deck or the Nintendo Switch, and have that ability to play these games based off of the actual ROG Ally on a monitor or a television, and just be able to have a big picture mode, essentially, where you're able to play these on a larger screen. That being said, it doesn't work as seamlessly as I would like, and because of that, there are some qualms that I have. I'll talk about that later on in the video. There is also an option to buy an eGPU, which comes with a 3080. Honestly, if you're going to spend $1,400–1,500 on an eGPU, you might as well just go ahead and buy and put that money towards an actual PC. That way you're able to go ahead and have a full-on blown PC experience, and you can use the cloud to just transfer save data to and from. Most platforms, most launchers allow you to sync data across devices. So if you have something on here, and let's say you're playing on Steam or EGS or whatever it may be, it'll sync across the board. You don't really have to worry too much about it, guys. It'll be fine. Unboxing the ASUS ROG Ally is a pretty seamless experience. You pretty much pop open the box and the unit is right there staring at you. There is a little bit of plastic that you can just go ahead and come off with some very simple instructions. There is also some paperwork, and finally the 65-watt charger. There is also this little rinky dink of a stand that is pretty much made of paper mache, if you were to consider it that. I mean, I don't know. This is honestly kind of abysmal. I would have rather spent an extra $20–30 and would have gotten a better stand or some other option that is out there for the ASUS ROG Ally. This is kind of embarrassing, but regardless, that's what we get, and it does the job. If I'm being honest, it does the job. You can stand it, and you don't really have to worry about it tipping over, but I just wish that it was, I don't know, plastic or just something that was a little bit better built. Because I have extra docks that are just lying around, I decided to go ahead and try them out to see if I could get a video out with the ASUS ROG Ally. When I tried the official Steam Deck dock from Valve, I got an error message on the Ally letting me know that it was incompatible with that dock. But when I tried third-party docks, specifically from JSO, everything seemed to work just fine. Now, I know that this is something that isn't actually engineered for the ASUS ROG Ally, so your mileage may vary, and this could potentially put your unit at risk. But when I was trying it out and testing it out, it seemed to work just fine. So you can proceed at your own risk. I'll have links in the descriptions to all the ones that I tried that actually worked with this handheld. Before we get any deeper into the tech specs on this thing, I do want you to be aware that this is essentially a Windows computer. It just happens to be in a handheld form. So all of the aspects that are there, the pros and the cons of Windows OS, are very apparent in this handheld. That being said, this does come with an AMD Ryzen Z1 Extreme CPU. This also comes with an AMD Radeon Graphics RDNA 3 GPU that can produce up to 8.6 teraflops. The TDP can range anywhere from 9 to 30 watts. The screen, though, above all else, is what really sells me on this handheld. You have a 7-inch screen that is a 1920 by 1080 and a 16 by 9 ratio. It has 100% sRGB, a 120 hertz refresh rate, 7 millisecond response time, 500 nit brightness, and FreeSync Premium. It does come with 16 gigabytes of LPDDR5 RAM and comes with 512 gigabytes of 4.0 NVMe M.2 2230 SSD storage. On paper, this thing is awesome. It checks off all of the boxes that I personally want in a handheld form factor, something that I can take on the go and have a phenomenal experience while gaming. So when you first boot up your ASUS ROG Ally, what's going to end up happening is Windows 11 will have that initial boot up sequence and you'll have to get everything set up. I, for one, kind of expected that. This is a Windows PC after all, but I did run into issues on getting that on-screen keyboard to pop up. So I actually borrowed this from my job. It's just a wireless mouse pad and keyboard, and it did the job. It runs off of 2.4 gigahertz. There's going to be some links in the description below that lead towards keyboards that are similar to this. But once everything's set up and running, it honestly runs really, really smoothly. I will say that I did not know about this shortcut. Essentially, if you hold the back panel and you push up, your keyboard will pop up. So I don't know if this actually is available during that initial boot up sequence, but this is something that I would go ahead and take into consideration without actually spending money on something like this. So keep that in account. I will say that this handheld feels very good in my hands. I was a little bit concerned because of how thin it was, especially in comparison to other handhelds that are out there, but it feels nice. The buttons, my fingers, they rest just right where the buttons should be, so it feels like it's naturally supposed to be there. The D-pad kind of reminds me of the Xbox Series S and X D-pad, and that's not a bad thing. I absolutely love that D-pad. The analog sticks, they definitely leave a lot to be desired in terms of how much I actually have to put in order to actually get some form of a response from them on screen. The buttons themselves, the A, Y, X, and B buttons, they feel pretty good. I mean, they don't feel as good as a $700 handheld should feel, but it's enough to get by, so to speak. It kind of feels like a cheaper version of the Xbox Series X and S controllers buttons, but overall it is what it is. The left bumper and the right bumper, they feel nice, and they definitely feel like you can beat the bejesus out of them. When it comes to the triggers themselves, they feel nice too. If you look at the top, there is a 3.5 millimeter jack, as well as a micro SD card slot for expanding your memory. Then there is a USB-C port, which also is surrounded by this crazy eGPU port that's a proprietary port for ASUS products. I am not a fan of this at all, but if you have the money and you don't care to spend it, then by all means go ahead and go for it to get that eGPU ready to go. Then there's your volume rocker, and over here you have your power button, which also doubles as your fingerprint sensor. One of the things that I have noticed is that sometimes whenever I try to move the icon here in the Armoury crate, it'll just go ahead and jump right all over the screen. I don't think that this has anything to do with the hardware. I think that this is a software issue. Let me be 100% honest with that. I think that in future updates of Armoury crate, this will be ironed out, because even when I do launch a game when it's doing things like this, there aren't any misinputs that happen when I'm actually gaming with this handheld. I do recommend that you get a micro SD card to expand your storage. The easiest way to do this is to just go online and find a micro SD card that has the A2 and the U3 class on there. That just means that it's much faster and you'll have a smoother gaming experience on the go. If you do want to go ahead and get a little bit more technical and a little bit more hands-on, you can also expand the storage by getting a 2230 M.2 NVMe SSD. This means that all you have to do is just pop open the back, change that out, reflash everything, and get everything on the handheld itself. If you don't feel like taking things apart, then you can go with a micro SD card and you will be more than fine with expanding your storage that way. The audio on this thing is absolutely amazing. These speakers are extremely loud. I mean, I'm gonna go ahead and put it up so you can go ahead and hear it, but my mic's not even close to this thing and it's like ridiculously loud. If I were to go ahead and put it close, here, check this out. It is ridiculously loud and I absolutely love everything about it. One of the issues that I do have with this handheld is essentially dropping out of a game or putting it in sleep mode and waking it back up. So let's say that I am in the middle of something and I don't know, I need to go ahead and put this to sleep. So I go ahead and I turn it off. There is a little power meter that is here, or an LED indicator letting you know that there is still power there and that it is still on. If I go ahead and I push that again, it goes ahead and takes me here and I unlock it. And then there's this really weird like phase where you go back into Windows before actually being able to access the game. It's not as seamless or as smooth as you would expect from a handheld experience, especially when you're putting something to sleep and you turning it back on and wanting to jump back into the game. Sometimes, some instances, the game just crashes and that kind of leaves a lot to be desired in terms of functionality. My assumption is that with future updates, this will all be ironed out and fixed. I do have to give it to ASUS. They have done a really good job in terms of trying to get this to have a console-esque sort of feel where all of your games are available to you and all of your apps are there ready to go ahead and boot up. It just feels like they tried to make this as console-esque as possible, similar to the Steam Deck or the Nintendo Switch. And honestly, I've got to applaud them for that. There's definitely a lot of instances, especially after all of the updates that I went ahead and put this when I first booted it up, that they ironed out a lot of issues. If you go into settings, there are some settings for adjusting the different options that are there. There's a desktop mode and gamepad mode. For the most part, I do have it set up to just automatically adjust between the two, and I'll show you how to do that in a bit. But once you come into gamepad mode, you can adjust the dead zones for the left stick, the right stick, which I have ran into some issues, and apparently other users online have run into this as well, where if look at how long I have to go ahead and kind of like move in order to actually get some form of movement to register. It's quite a bit, especially in comparison to other analog sticks that are out there. If you want to adjust the sensitivity of the triggers, you can. These are analog triggers, so if there are some games that you play that have analog trigger functionality, then that's something that's there. Vibration I left as is just because it feels really good and it doesn't feel like it's over the top. Before we start talking about changing the tiles in your command center, I did want to let you know that in order to access the command center, all you have to do is just push this button right here, and then the command center will go ahead and pop up. The cool thing that I really like about this is that you're able to adjust a lot of things on the fly. So let's say you're playing a 2D title that isn't very power intensive, you would be more than fine in silent mode. You really won't need too much horsepower when it comes to that. But if you're playing something like, let's say, a AAA 3D title, something that requires a little bit more processing, then you can go ahead and switch to performance mode, or if you want to use even more power, then you can use the turbo mode, which clocks it all the way up to 25 watts. I like being able to go ahead and adjust these things because let's say you want to consume less power, then all you have to do is just go into here and adjust other settings in order to have a smoother gaming experience. Obviously, your mileage may vary. There is a lot of things that come into account, but you can set things up to play just the way that you want them to. There is an FPS limiter that's here that goes all the way down to 15 frames per second, which I don't know why you would want that unless you're using that for work and non-gaming purposes, but it is an option that's there, and it goes in 15 frame per second increments all the way up to 60 before it turns off. There is AMD RSR as well as a resolution option that you can switch from 720 to 1080. I have mine set as 720 and I haven't experienced any issues at all. The refresh rate limiter can go between 60 hertz or 120 hertz, and honestly I leave it at 120 because that's the maximum that the screen can do, but also because I like the fluidity of having that. Even whenever there's some sub 60 FPS moments, it doesn't feel like there's too many frames being missed whenever I'm playing the game with a 120 hertz monitor. Now, if you wanted to go ahead and go into desktop mode, all you have to do is hit this Windows key that's right here and it'll take you into desktop mode. And if for any instance, the shortcut that I talked about earlier that doesn't Oh, all right, there's my cat. If for any instance that shortcut that I talked about earlier doesn't bring up the keyboard, then you can go ahead and push this button right here and it'll go ahead and bring that keyboard up for you. Now, if there are things in the command center that you want to edit or add or whatever it may be, all you have to do is go into add, and then from there are other options that are available to you. I haven't found a way to actually move the tiles around and get them organized. I've tried long pressing or whatever it may be. The only way that I can figure out to actually reorder this is to actually get rid of everything and then add them in the order that you want to pop up, which is kind of inconvenient, but it is what it is. You know, it's Armoury Crate. I personally had very low expectations going into this and have been pleasantly surprised in terms of the functionality and everything that's there. If you go into content from here, you know, like I said earlier, I would recommend updating just to kind of get things going. But there are a bunch of game platforms that are here that'll just go ahead and let you download whatever it is that you want to go and download and access it from there. So let's say that I wanted to go ahead and load up a game. Now, you do have the option to just load up the game right then and there as is, but if you wanted to load in an application, it'll show you the desktop very briefly, and then it'll load the application that you wanted to go ahead and use. So if I wanted to use, let's say cloud gaming, and I wanted to, actually I was playing a little bit of Tunic. If I wanted to go ahead and play Tunic, I just go here, and everything runs off of the D-pad or the analog stick, which is pretty convenient. And then from there, I just go ahead and start gaming. Well, that's just what happens with games sometimes on Windows. You boot them up and they crash and you move on and you just go from there. But I figured it would be a good opportunity to talk about the 65-watt charger dock from ROG that is there to support an HDMI output from this that you can connect onto a TV without the external GPU. So the cool thing about this is that, yes, it's a 65-watt charger, but it provides enough power to not only keep this thing juiced up, but also provide a video out that you can connect to a monitor or a TV via HDMI 2.0. I do like the fact that it comes with that, but it also comes with a USB-C PD 3.0. Now, why is that important? It's important because it allows for more wattage and more information to process through the USB-C cable. That means when you have things connected, you don't really necessarily have to worry about things getting bottlenecked in terms of data coming in from one thing to the other. Also, you don't have to worry about things running out of power, which is, in my opinion, relatively nice. It's not 100% perfect. I would have some instances where I would hook up my ROG Ally to my television or my monitor, and the audio wouldn't actually come out of my speakers or my television. It would just go ahead and come out of the speakers of the ROG Ally itself. I've also had instances where I would plug everything up in the middle of playing a game and the image would come off all weird, and then when I would unplug it, it would also remain weird, and I would have to go ahead and completely do a hard reboot on the system itself in order to actually get it up and running. There are some kinks. That's kind of normal. There's jank in Windows OS, but it would be nice to have some of that fixed in order to have a seamless experience when transitioning from docked to undocked and vice versa. If you're okay with a little bit of jankiness or hiccups when docking or undocking the ASUS ROG Ally from its charging dock, then yeah, go ahead and go for it. This is something that is a viable option. If you want something that is completely and totally seamless without any issues at all, or you get easily frustrated when tech doesn't work the right way for you, then this is something that I would probably steer away from. There's already enough jankiness with the ASUS ROG Ally as is, but overall, if you're okay with even a little bit, I think it's worth it. At least having that option and being able to play these games on screen and then having it handheld as well, I think it's a nice to have. Battery life can make or break a mobile gaming experience, and when it comes to the ASUS ROG Ally, the battery life is more or less what I expected. We're going to be getting around an hour to an hour and a half of full-on gaming when it comes to 3D AAA titles. Now, if you go on with either 2D titles or you're emulating older titles, you're able to go ahead and keep on gaming for at least 3 to 5, sometimes maybe even 6 hours, depending on what it is that you're actually doing. Windows is a little bit more power hungry than other OSs, so that is something else to take into account because there is going to be a lot of things that are happening in the background, but I digress. When it comes to actually gaming on this handheld, I haven't had any instances where I'm like, oh, well, the battery is dying, so I have to go ahead and find my charger. Most of the time, I can finish my gaming session without having to worry too much in terms of whether or not I'm going to be close enough to a save point before my battery battery dies. And even if this is something that does worry you that you're going to run out of power whenever you're traveling or whatever it may be, you can always get a battery bank. That way you don't have to really worry about anything. You just have to make sure that it's a 65-watt output. That way you can go ahead and properly charge the handheld while you're out and about. Speaking of traveling, I did also pick up the official ROG Ally traveling case. And at first I was a little bit worried because of how flimsy it is. I mean, it doesn't really, exude protectiveness to it. But when I actually went ahead and put in the ROG Ally and I closed the case, it feels really protected in there. It feels like, I don't know, like I'm not too worried about it actually like getting a beating in there. It just feels much more, I don't know, form-fitting once the Ally is actually in there and not without it. Because when you actually go ahead and take out the Ally and just close the case normally, I don't know, it seems kind of, weak and not really that protective. But when I go ahead and put in the Ally, it feels perfectly fine, and I am not really too worried about whether or not it can actually protect the Ally and keep it from being destroyed. Yeah, not bad at all. So who is the ASUS ROG Ally for? The way that I see it, this is for somebody that isn't afraid to tinker in order to figure things out on the go. Most of the time, if you're a PC gamer, you're already used to figuring things out anyways in order to get the best optimal experience while gaming. In this instance, you're just going to have that on the go. So if you know somebody that is into PC gaming and wants to have a handheld experience on the go, this is a prime example that can work just for them. I know some of you all are wondering whether or not I would recommend the ASUS ROG Ally over the Steam Deck. And to be honest with you, as of right now, I am reaching more for the ROG Ally over the Steam Deck, but this is probably because this is something that is brand new and it's flashy and it has my attention for the time being. That being said, I am going to be working on a video doing a direct comparison between the two. So if you haven't already, I'd appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel. That way you can go ahead and stay up to date. So what do you guys think about the ASUS ROG Ally? I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below, and let me know if you have any questions about anything. If you want to hear my thoughts about the Steam Deck 5 months later, then click this video over here and I will see you on the next one. Till next time, guys, peace.